Is more always better? Spider-Man 2 wants you to think yes, featuring 2 Spider-Men for you to play as instead of 1. And it's a PS5 exclusive, so that's gotta be exciting. I mean, surely it is the most magical, mystifying, life-changing gaming experience ever made, right? Well, let's talk about it. You know what is the most life-changing experience? Liking the video, commenting, subscribing to the channel. Now, I've always liked the Spider-Man games, going all the way back to the original Spider-Man on the PlayStation 1. Superhero games in general, I think, make a great setting for an open-world game. You have this host of side content that you can create that revolves around all of the hero's many enemies. You always want to do the side content since you're keeping the city safe, you're dealing with all of these villains. But sadly, that is my biggest complaint when it comes to Spider-Man 2. The side content is here, but man, it just feels basic and samey. Pretty much every side quest revolves around you going to a specific location on the map, which will trigger a wave or 2 of enemies that you have to take down. This repetition is at least mitigated by the fact that the game's combat is smooth as ever. It is so satisfying to fight enemies, and while I wouldn't say the combat itself is really involved or challenging, it is fun. Each of the 2 Spider-Men feel very unique in how they fight and use their abilities. I actually found my preference shifting between the 2 constantly over the course of the story as I unlocked new abilities for each of them, and I never really favored one over the other. So even though they're repetitive, the side quests are at least fun. The bigger issue with them are the stories they're telling. There's really not a lot of depth to any of them, which makes it sort of feel like a waste of time after having run around the map doing all these errands, essentially. This is then compounded by the fact that there's really not a lot of side content in the game at all. I completed a 100% playthrough of the game in just under 20 hours. So it's not like this game's a bloated mess. There's not really a lot to do. I think there was a lot of room to either mix up the activities or at least include more narrative to the side content. And really the worst part about this is that there are a couple huge cliffhangers in some of these side quests that you know they held back for either DLC or a later Spider-Man game. Tell a complete story, tell a real story. As it is, the side content feels very thin. Looking at the main narrative of the game, a large theme of it is redemption. This idea that Spider-Man has in his villains that people deserve a second chance, and it's possible for the bad guy to turn his life around. But I think even this is overused quite a bit in the game. Almost every returning villain from the game is trying to be a good guy. Mysterio just wants to make illusion attractions at Coney Island. Sandman doesn't want to be Sandman, but somebody made him be Sandman. Prowler is definitely done being the Prowler, and the list goes on. It really just feels like a cop-out. I think it's fine to use this idea once or twice, especially because it is so normally used in these types of stories where the bad guy pretends to be a good guy, but really he's a bad guy. So the idea of having some actual redemption there is nice, but you can't just redeem everybody. That can't be everybody's story. I mean, in one case especially, a villain gets to just walk away into the sunset, seemingly redeemed, even though, for sure, they have to go back to prison for 50 years. And the game just doesn't address it. The game tries to have 2 protagonists, Peter and Miles, but it doesn't feel like they're in the same story. Instead, it feels like there are 2 separate, occasionally intersecting stories going on through the main narrative of the game. Now, each of the 2 individuals, I think, goes on an interesting journey and has a really cool character arc, but it again felt a little thin. I just wish there was more to it. The game is short, and it really didn't need to be. They could have explored more with both of the Spider-Man characters and really dug into what they were dealing with a lot more detail. That said, what we do get in the story, I think, is pretty good. Kraven the Hunter is not that engaging. He's essentially just a guy hunting bad guys. And how they set up villains in these Spider-Man games where they somehow take over the entire city, I don't know, that's just a little old to me. I wish they could come up with a new idea for what the main villain does, essentially. Even with the weak villain, the personal stories that Peter and Miles are experiencing help him not be that much of an issue. I don't know if this is minor spoilers or not, but if you've really heard nothing about this game, the real big bad is Venom. And once he and the symbiote get into the narrative, I thought the overall narrative really picks up. One other big thing that this game had going for it is the fact that it's a first-party PS5 exclusive, something that is in very short supply. Sometimes it really feels like it, and other times it really doesn't. When zipping around the city, I thought the game looked absolutely stunning. I played on fidelity mode and had a stable frame rate throughout. The buildings in Spider-Man just look lifelike at times. But then, at other times, usually indoors, the game looked really bad. Like, I'd be complaining about the graphics if this was a PS4 game bad. I don't know how this happened, I don't know why this happened, and I mean, luckily there's not as much time spent in these interiors. You are mostly swinging around the city, doing things in the overworld. But it was jarring at times, how the graphics almost felt like two different games, depending on the scenario. I also had a really weird issue with the character models themselves. I don't know if it was an uncanny valley type thing, but the lip syncing was pretty great. The hand motions I thought were extremely impressive. Miles and his friends are using sign language to communicate. I don't know sign language, but it looked like they were you could tell what they were signing, which I thought was impressive. But at the same time, the character models just look off. Again, most of the time, you're swinging through the city as Spider-Man, and that's going to look and feel great, but there are these moments that can really take you out because of the jarring switch in graphics. Getting around the city still feels great. I think this game nicely evolved and streamlined the movement, especially thanks to the Web Wings addition that lets Spider-Man kind of fly around as he's going through the city. Ultimately, Spider-Man 2 was a very bittersweet experience. Overall, I still really liked it. I liked what I got, but I wish I got more. Especially when you look back on the side content and how shallow and basic it all felt. I did really enjoy the main story, enjoyed the combat, the movement, but there's just not enough of it. The game ends right when it's really hitting its stride. It's interesting because they expanded the game world to include Queens and Brooklyn, and yet shrunk the game that was fit inside of it. There's definitely less here than the first Spider-Man, and it almost feels like there's less here than the Miles Morales expansion, which is not what you want in your mainline sequel to this franchise. Obviously, if you liked the previous Spider-Man games on the PS4, you're gonna like this one. But still, this game feels like a misstep, and it makes it hard to really recommend it, especially at full price. So for a final rating, I would give the presentation a 4 out of 5, the story a 3.5 out of 5, the gameplay a 4 out of 5, for an overall rating of a 4 out of 5, and for value, really I'd just say wait for a sale. If you haven't played the previous Spider-Man game, play those instead. There's more there, and they also look great on the PS5. But what do you think? Am I wrong? Do you like that it was a shorter experience? Let me know in the comments down below. What superhero should we have in a game next? I know they're making Wolverine, but come up with your own answer, be original, and I will see you all with the next video.